students. This week in Social Problems class, we are going to look at Chapter 12 on population growth and aging. There's a lot of topics that we need to cover, just some bare basic foundational vocabulary and concepts like fertility rates and demographic transition model and these kinds of things that are introduced to you in Chapter 12. And we need to look at some background about this, about theories of population also, because this is actually a hot button topic in current events in the world today. It might not be a topic that you personally have your finger on the pulse of, but there are a lot of global figures, movers and shakers in world government and world policy making that focus on population growth as a problem. Some say that population is growing so rapidly that poverty is increasing, that health problems increase, the world can't support it, for instance. So population size and the food supply that is available to people on the planet has always been something that has been linked, theoretically linked since Thomas Malthus, who is a famous economist from the 18th century, actually, looked at the way population was growing. It looked at the way that the crude birth rate was increasing, but the crude death rate was decreasing. That means that people were getting older, people were living longer in the population. And part of that was because agriculture was making it possible for people to be healthier. We had more calories, therefore we were healthier, and we had more calories available to us, and therefore we lived longer. And so people were having lots of kids because kids are the cheapest labor on a farm. And so this is back in the 18th century that we're talking about, the end of the 18th century. And so anyway, you saw populations grow, especially in Western society, in Europe, and not so much in the United States at that time, but definitely his observation, Thomas Malthus's observations, were made about the population boom and population growth in Europe. And so one of his major complaints, or warnings really, about population growth was that in his prediction, the way that he could foresee the future, he saw a future where the world, with the land available and the crop technology that we had at the time, he saw a world where the food supply would not be able to keep up with the number of people in the population. And so he warned about people having smaller families. He said you should have smaller families and stop having so many children. You should wait longer to become mothers, get a career first or something. This was revolutionary for the time that he was alive, So anyway, he said that the food supply was not going to support the population size. And this is an important classical population theory for us to look at today, because a lot of the perceived social problems associated with population have to do with not really the amount of food that is necessary, because we have progressed so much technologically that we can feed pretty much, everybody that might be born ever in the world. We can feed them. Part of the reason why there's so much hunger in the world in certain places is not because there's not enough food, but it's because of corruption in the governmental agencies and individuals who are supposed to have the population's best interest at heart, but instead funnel money and funding and sell food supplies or sell mineral deposits or whatever from their countries instead of thinking about the population there. So that's one of the major problems that we see, such terrible absolute poverty worldwide and starvation in a lot of places worldwide, because the food supply, we've got that down pat. Thomas Malthus was wrong about that, but people use his ideas to talk about how the food supply that we have come to know and love, like really, really meat heavy diets in the West, especially, that causes a great deal of taxation on the globe, on the earth, on climate change, and that a lot of the problems that we have with climate change in their theoretical they propose theoretically that climate change would be significantly lessened. Negative climate change would be significantly lessened if we changed the way our food was produced, if we changed the types of foods that we eat. You might you might have seen in pop news about Bill Gates, who, of course, we know him from his involvement with Microsoft from the last century, and now he is a philanthropist and participates a lot in global efforts to reduce population, but he also is somebody who wants us to be meatless. He sees cattle production, pork production, chicken production, these kinds of industrialized farms that we have in society today to feed the demands of the population. He sees these as a significant negative impact on climate. And so Thomas Malthus's concepts about food being linked with population, he was wrong with his particular way in which he proposed that food would be a problem for population. But his general ideas are being used, modified and used, neo-Malthusian, you call it. It's being used to explain why we need to control population growth. And so there's a lot of pop cultural figures like Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum's guy, Noah Harari is his name. You can look him up. Anyway, they have a lot of videos on YouTube, a lot of news bits that you can find in current events talking about how population size needs to be controlled, and basically it will help the planet survive. For instance. On the flip side of that, there are other pop cultural figures like Elon Musk, who is famous for recently, 2-3 years ago, I think he made an interview where he said population is a problem. So he agreed with that much, but he said population is a problem because it's shrinking and there aren't enough workers in the workforce, was one of his arguments. And so you can find videos, snippets of him or whole interviews of him on YouTube talking about population problems from his point of view. I think Jordan Peterson, another pop cultural figure, has a similar view to Elon Musk, I think. I'm not as familiar with his point of view, but a student informs me that, yeah, Jordan Peterson also thinks that we shouldn't control population growth in the same ways that people like Bill Gates and Noah Harari are suggesting. So there's a lot of outside source opportunities for you to look at this week with population growth and aging. In the next video, we'll talk about the aging population. We'll talk about populations that are shrinking and something called a demographic transition model that kind of explains why, attempts to explain why populations are shrinking. So anyway, we will look at this, and also the population and aging. This chapter, we're doing right after the migration chapter, and so we should also think about how certainly migration to a certain area. In the next video, when we're talking about birth rates and death rates of native populations, there's my air quotes on the word native, when we're talking about those populations and migration changing the demographics of a place, demographic has to do with what is your sex category, what is your racial category, what is your ethnic category, what are these kinds of identifying characteristics of who you are, what is your religious background, these kinds of things. And so when we talk about population, it's in this particular chapter, it's about birth rates and death rates and increases and decreases based on that. Certainly population change can happen because of migration, but the kinds of theories that we have about birth and death rates don't look at changes in population because of migration. Some countries don't accept migrants into their population anyway, as we have seen in previous lessons. So this is our first lesson on population, and I will see you again to talk about more. Text me with questions.